Gross domestic product, or GDP, is more than just a number reported on the news. It's a snapshot of a country's economic health, and it affects your life in ways you might not realize. From job opportunities to business growth, inflation, and even government policies, GDP drives the decisions that shape your financial world. In this video, we'll break down what GDP really is, how it's measured, and why it matters to you personally, all in simple, easy-to-understand terms. Today, we will talk about GDP, explained, why it matters more than you think so. Before we start, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. 1. What is GDP? GDP, or gross domestic product, is the total value of all goods and services produced within a country over a specific period, usually a year or a quarter. It is widely used as a measure of a country's economic performance. GDP helps determine whether an economy is growing or shrinking. A rising GDP usually indicates economic expansion, while a declining GDP can signal a recession. GDP includes everything from the cars produced, services rendered, food harvested, to software developed. It provides a snapshot of the overall health of the economy and helps policymakers, investors, and citizens make informed decisions. Despite being a powerful tool, GDP has limitations. It does not account for income inequality, environmental impacts, or unpaid work like household labor. Still, it remains a central measure of economic activity, and understanding it is key to interpreting economic news and national policy. Knowing how GDP works helps you understand why governments and businesses make certain financial decisions and how it can impact your personal finances. 2. Components of GDP. GDP is composed of four main components: consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. Consumption refers to all private spending by households on goods and services, such as groceries, clothing, or entertainment. Investment includes spending on business capital, infrastructure, and new construction. Government spending covers public services, infrastructure projects, and salaries of government employees. Net exports equal a country's exports minus imports, showing the contribution of international trade. Each component contributes differently depending on the country's structure. For example, in highly industrialized nations, consumption often dominates, while in resource-based economies, exports may play a larger role. Understanding these components provides insight into what drives economic growth. Changes in any component can significantly affect overall GDP, which in turn can influence employment, inflation, and policy decisions. By breaking GDP into these categories, you can better understand the dynamics of your country's economy and why certain sectors are prioritized. 3. GDP growth and the economy. GDP growth measures how much a country's economy is expanding over time. Positive GDP growth suggests more jobs, higher income, and improved standards of living. Governments often aim for steady growth to avoid economic instability. Slow growth or negative growth can indicate economic problems, such as rising unemployment or reduced consumer spending. Businesses also monitor GDP growth because it influences investment decisions. High growth can lead to increased production and expansion, while low growth may result in cost-cutting measures. GDP growth rates are usually compared quarterly and annually to track trends. Strong GDP growth can attract foreign investment and improve national confidence. However, extremely rapid growth can cause inflation and resource strain. Understanding GDP growth helps individuals, investors, and policymakers gauge the strength of the economy and anticipate potential challenges. 4. Real versus nominal. GDP can be measured in two ways: nominal and real. Nominal GDP calculates the value of goods and services at current market prices without adjusting for inflation. Real GDP adjusts for inflation, reflecting the true volume of production over time. This distinction is important because it allows for accurate comparisons across years. For instance, if prices increase but production remains the same, nominal GDP may rise while real GDP stays flat. Economists prefer real GDP to understand actual economic growth. Real GDP provides a more accurate picture of how much an economy is producing and whether citizens' purchasing power is improving. By comparing real GDP over multiple periods, we can see if growth is driven by increased production or just higher prices. Understanding this difference helps interpret economic data more accurately and make informed decisions. 5. GDP per capita. GDP per capita divides a country's total GDP by its population, providing an average economic output per person. This metric helps compare living standards across countries or regions. A high GDP per capita generally indicates higher income and better quality of life, although it does not account for inequality or wealth distribution. Countries with similar total GDP may have very different GDP per capita due to population differences. For example, a small nation with moderate production can have a higher GDP per capita than a larger nation with massive total GDP. GDP per capita is useful for analyzing economic well-being, guiding policy decisions, and planning social programs. It helps citizens understand how economic output translates to individual prosperity and reveals the potential for investment in infrastructure, healthcare, and education. However, it should be considered alongside other indicators for a complete picture of societal welfare. 6. Limitations of GDP. While GDP is a vital economic measure, it has notable limitations. GDP does not account for income inequality, environmental degradation, or unpaid work, such as caregiving or volunteer services. It also ignores the informal economy, which can be significant in some countries. A country could have a high GDP but suffer from widespread poverty or environmental destruction. Similarly, GDP growth does not always equate to improved well-being or happiness. Some economists argue that relying solely on GDP can lead governments to prioritize economic output over social or environmental health. Understanding these limitations allows people to interpret GDP data critically. While GDP measures activity and production, it does not capture quality of life or sustainability. A balanced view of the economy requires combining GDP with other metrics like Human Development Index, Gini coefficient, and environmental indicators. 7. How GDP influences policy. GDP plays a central role in government and central bank decisions. Policymakers monitor GDP to assess the economy's health and adjust monetary or fiscal policy accordingly. High GDP growth may prompt central banks to raise interest rates to prevent inflation. Conversely, slow growth or recession may lead to stimulus measures, such as tax cuts or increased government spending. GDP data also informs budget planning, social programs, and public investments. Understanding GDP allows citizens to see why governments make certain policy choices. For example, during economic downturns, policymakers focus on growth initiatives to boost jobs and income. Conversely, during strong growth periods, they may focus on managing inflation and ensuring sustainable development. GDP-driven policies directly affect taxes, borrowing costs, and public services, making it highly relevant to everyday life. 8. Global comparisons using GDP. GDP allows countries to compare economic performance internationally. Total GDP ranks nations by size of economy, while GDP per capita shows relative prosperity. Comparing GDP across countries can reveal economic strengths, competitive advantages, and development gaps. Investors and multinational companies use GDP data to identify growth opportunities. International organizations like the World Bank and IMF rely on GDP for policy analysis and funding decisions. If you liked this video and would like to see more like it, please give it the thumbs up. Leave a comment and click the button to subscribe.